Without a shadow of a doubt, Andrew Jackson was one of the most controversial presidents in the history of the United States of America. In this video, I'll tell you everything you need to know and more. Let's get started. To start, Jackson did not have a pretty childhood. He was born in present-day South Carolina, where he had little opportunity for formal education, in 1767. When he was around 13, the British invaded the Carolinas, killing his mother and 2 brothers while imprisoning him. There is a famous tale of him while he was imprisoned. It consisted of him refusing to shine a British officer's shoes and getting hit in the face with a saber as a result. Both his imprisonment and his family's death caused lifelong animosity towards the British. After the war, he passed the bar exam and moved to Nashville, which was still a small settlement at the time. He gained a job as a prosecuting attorney. As Jackson gained connections, he even became a member of the convention that drafted a constitution for the new state of Tennessee, as they split off from the Carolinas in 1796. In the same year, he was elected as the first representative from Tennessee to the U.S. House of Representatives. However, it left a sour taste in his mouth, and after his first year in office, he vowed to never enter the political scene again. Spoiler alert, that didn't happen. Before the end of the same year, he was elected to the U.S. Senate, and he grudgingly accepted. After his term was over, he served as a judge on the Tennessee Superior Court until 1804. Then he was elected as Major General of the Tennessee militia. He held onto this role until the War of 1812, where he got the call that his sworn enemies, the British, were invading mainland United States. Jackson immediately offered his services to the United States, hoping to help invade British Canada. The U.S. was slow in replying, but he got the word that he was to fight the Creeks, a native tribe allied with the British. In the Battle of Horseshoe Bend, he wiped the Creeks off the face of the earth, slaughtering 800 of their 1,000 troops. The victory was so decisive that Jackson was established as the hero of the West. In 1814, Jackson moved his army south, in Mobile, with the goal of capturing Spanish-owned Pensacola. Despite not having instructions to invade Spain, he thought that since the Spanish were allied with the British in European wars, all bets were off. In Mobile, Jackson learned that an army of British regulars had landed at Pensacola, but by the time he captured the city, they evacuated towards Louisiana. If you thought Jackson would lay low and settle, you'd be wrong. Instead, he marched his army overland to New Orleans, where he enlisted the help of infamous pirate Jean Lafitte. On January 8, 1815, they engaged with the British in what's known as the Battle of New Orleans. They were able to fend off the British and force their evacuation, officially ending the war. This made Jackson a national hero. In 1817, Jackson was ordered to invade Spanish Florida, and he quickly captured 2 Spanish posts. This hastened the U.S. acquisition of Florida, as Spain was in no position to defend the landmass. Jackson's military triumphs led to suggestions that he become a candidate for president, but he disavowed any interest. Without him knowing, a group of his friends carefully nurtured public support for him and kept him popular. In 1822, these friends maneuvered the Tennessee legislature into a formal nomination of their hero as a candidate for president. In 1824, 4 candidates received electoral votes. Andrew Jackson got 99, John Quincy Adams recorded 84, Crawford got 41, and Henry Clay got 37. Because no candidate met the threshold to be crowned as president, the House of Representatives was required to elect a president from the 3 with the highest number of votes. However, Crawford fell critically ill, so the choice was only between Adams and Jackson. Henry Clay happened to be the Speaker of the House, and he gave his complete support to Adams, who was ultimately elected. This was called the corrupt bargain because Clay was appointed as Secretary of State in exchange for supporting Adams. Jackson's friends convinced him the will of the public had been thwarted by intrigues, and he was determined to avenge himself in the next election. He would get his chance 4 years later in 1828. This was the first American election where slander played such a large role. Jackson and his wife Rachel were vilified to such extremes that Rachel, an extremely shy and religious wife, died later that year. Nevertheless, Jackson was able to defeat John Quincy Adams 178-83. Jackson was also the first president from the area west of the Appalachians, as well as being the first president born in poverty. More importantly, Jackson's campaign was based on appealing to the mass of voters instead of through the support of a large political organization. Today, he's often referred to as the maker of the modern presidency. Jackson did not start his presidency harmoniously, as there was an intense feud between the Vice President John C. Calhoun and the Secretary of State Martin Van Buren. Jackson also found out that Calhoun was secretly urging Congress to impeach him. This was supposedly over the invasion of Florida from a decade earlier, where Jackson hung 2 British subjects. Jackson also began his term with South Carolina protesting a tariff, and Calhoun took up their cause. South Carolina declared the tariff null and void and prohibited enforcing it within their boundaries. Jackson responded by denouncing the theory of nullification and asked Congress for authority to send troops into South Carolina. Jackson was able to convince Congress to lower the tariffs while also passing the Force Bill. The Force Bill empowered the president to use the armed forces to enforce federal laws, and of course South Carolina declared this null and void as well. However, the state agreed to begin enforcing the lower tariff. The second major event that happened during Jackson's first term was in 1829. Georgia stole almost 9 million acres of Cherokee land. The U.S. signed a treaty with the Cherokees earlier, prohibiting this, and the Supreme Court sided with them twice. However, Georgia ignored the Supreme Court. In contrast to his strong reaction against South Carolina's defiance of federal authority, Jackson made no effort to restrain Georgia. The Cherokee, left without a choice, signed another treaty in 1835 giving up their land in exchange for land in the Indian Territory west of Arkansas. This forced removal of the Cherokees became known as the Trail of Tears, where many of them died of starvation, illness, and exposure. The Cherokees were the largest of these incidents, but not the only one. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 allowed Jackson to remove native tribes from their homelands in exchange for less valuable and uninhabited western prairie land. This was not always met with compliance, and an example of resistance was the Second Seminole War, which lasted for 7 years. As the election of 1832 drew near, Jackson's opponents tried to embarrass him through the Bank of the United States. The charter for the bank was set to expire in 1836, and Jackson had not yet defined his stance. In the summer of the election year, Jackson's opponents in Congress rushed the bill through the chambers. This meant Jackson could no longer delay his stance on the bank. Since the majority of Jackson's supporters didn't support the bank, so he vetoed the bill. Jackson also was able to beat Henry Clay in the election of 1832 by a wide margin. Jackson's controversial financial policy picked up where it left off. He tried to persuade Congress to enact legislation limiting the circulation of banknotes, but he failed. Instead, in order to protect federal revenues against depreciation, he issued the Specie Circular. This was legislation that mandated all land purchases to be financed in either gold or silver. Banks could not keep up with the popular demand to convert the U.S. dollar to gold, so they began to fail. By the spring of 1837, the entire country was gripped by a financial panic. Luckily for Jackson, however, the full effects of the panic did not set in until after he finished his second term. After his presidency, he retired to his home, called the Hermitage, where he lived out the remaining 8 years of his life in peace. Today, Andrew Jackson remains one of the most controversial presidents. Around the nation, his statues are being torn down and his face is scheduled to be removed from the $20 bill. In his time as president, he drastically expanded the executive branch, displaced thousands of natives from their homelands, forged the two-party system, and threatened to invade South Carolina. However, he also eliminated national debt, promoted American industry, stayed out of international trouble, and dismantled the corrupt Second National Bank. After learning all this, what do you think about Andrew Jackson?